Hello and welcome back, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning back in again. This is a screencast thematic presentation, the second part, if you will, for the unit notes on the mass media. Before we get started, please remember that your task and your goal is still the same: to fill in the key content for the guided notes sections, and then, of course, later on answer any key concept questions that happen to appear on the Google Doc. Let's go ahead and continue forth and understand more about the evolution of media and the role that it plays now today. We should really throw it back here for a second and talk about newspapers, because they still don't get enough love, in my opinion. The typical perception of liberal bias really comes from people's perceptions of newspapers over time. Generally, the fact is that newspapers and sources tend to either support Democrat or Republican candidates, and over time, traditional media has taken on this connotation of supporting Republican candidates. Publishers tend to be Republicans of the newspapers themselves. However, there are complaints from both liberals and conservatives about this dichotomy and about this perception. Let me explain right now. Conservatives claim that reporters are too liberal today, like the journalists, that they're young, fresh college graduates, often from elite schools, and they might have hostility towards middle class values. On the other hand, liberals claim that publishers are conservative and therefore are more concerned with sales, profits, and money than exposing social, political, economic evils, and of course, therefore sticking to the status quo. So as you can see, even within the media, there is a divide between the different groups of people who are meant to report the news and, of course, to do it in an altruistic and genuine way. Now, additionally, something else to keep in mind here is that over time, with this lack of competition from real big media sources, most cities now have only one major newspaper, so therefore people in a metropolitan area might read one newspaper. Yes, there's a large amount of presidential campaign coverage devoted to day-to-day operations of a campaign. This is true. But the fact is that today's media has turned into what I think is horse race coverage. If you get the analogy here, of course, the media tries to predict winners and losers, and in this way, that could, of course, sway the news that you get. Now, let's take a quick moment to talk about TV. And as broadcast media, most of you guys might know this, that most people now still get their news from television. Even if you don't sit down and watch the evening news for a whole, 30 minutes, the fact is that most people do get their political information from TV broadcast media. Now, let's be fair, there is a decline of substance in coverage and a rise of the image and slogans of campaigns and politicians alike. But additionally, there's concern, and I understand this concern, that television is allied with big government. And so the use of TV as the electronic throne of the president can be good or bad. The president, of course, can do certain things as the commander-in-chief and, of course, just as being the president, to really establish a narrative and broadcast that to the public. They can now bypass journalists and with their annoying questions and go right to the people with a speech that they want to put on national television. Of course, there's a decline in the number of presidential press conferences over time, but what has happened is that the White House manipulation of TV with photo opportunities and sound bites is still really important. So whether we're talking about President Trump or President Biden, the fact is that both of these men do have access to the media and can pretty much get on TV whenever they want to. And you would think that that would be a good thing, and in many ways it is, because the American people should have access to their president and vice versa. However, there are some problems and implications with this too. So there's a concern that television has fostered a cynicism or distrust and negativism towards the government and politics and officials. This has created adversarial journalism. So, for example, I can recall many press conferences that the media had with President Trump and his press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, upon which both sides were not nice to each other. And this type of course, gauntlet, if you will, is not good for anybody watching and trying to get the truth. There is a lack of competition, though, and although the advent of cable has made this less of a problem, media conglomerates are coming together to form big, giant corporations. So there's a concern that people look at politics through the camera lens too, rather than the party lens. And so we see a decline of parties over time. So, for example, in the old days, if you will, there used to be, Democrats and just Republicans. But the fact is that, over time, now there's different people in different factions in those parties that the media doesn't really necessarily focus on. So we do see a relative decline of network TV news and the rise of cable TV news still in our world today in 2021. Now, additionally, something else you need to know is that there is somewhat of a symbiotic relationship between government and the press. You see, journalists need politicians to inform and entertain their audiences, and politicians need journalists for media exposure, so it would be best served for all of us if all these sides were able to get along. But as you are, I'm sure, aware that doesn't always happen. So the roles of the media become a little bit altered in this way. Sometimes, as you guys have already learned, the media can act as a gatekeeper where they can influence what information gets out and what information stays in to help set the national agenda. There's the media as a scorekeeper where they keep track of and help make political reputations like winners and losers. So, for example, Joe Biden's candidacy after the Democratic Iowa caucus looked pretty bad, and the media capitalized off of that, although he would later come back and win. The media acts as a watchdog too, where they scrutinize people, places, and events in a sort of a very cynical but also very real way. So, for example, in issues like Watergate in Vietnam and the Iran-Contra scandal, you would see a lot of this type of journalism taking place. Additionally, something else to keep in mind here is that the effects of the media can be quite noticeable at different times. They are most influential at the agenda setting phase of policymaking process. So, for example, with a new administration taking over just a few days ago, many Americans, I'm sure, are wondering what the media is going to report to them about what the Biden administration has on their agenda. Additionally, the media does issue framing too, where once an issue is on the national agenda, the media provides context for understanding of that issue. Sameness is also something you might see in the news when there's homogeneity of coverage on certain topics. So, for example, there are issues that are covered the exact same way at the same time. I hate to say it, but I think it's true, but gun violence in America and mass shootings are often covered in the same cyclic motion by the media. Media companies are also businesses where their main objective is to make money, establish and maintain their viewers, ongoing and ongoing. But they still provide a forum for the building candidate of images and, of course, of policies and, of course, of promises that will hopefully come to fruition. Some other things to keep in mind here is that the media still acts as a linking mechanism between government and the people, so we must honor that relationship. Additionally, in the past, the way that it used to work was that people used to get their information from political parties, and of course that information was then given to the government. But now people go to and through the media, and then that information then goes to and through our government officials. It also works in the opposite direction as well. However, the fact is that media coverage does contribute to higher cost of campaigning, and so therefore campaigns have become more expensive over the years for sure. And of course, there's also this need to contribute to a candidate, and the media does focus on the center of their campaigns in this way. One more thing I'd like to say here is, this is I think really important, there is the increase of role of campaign consultants through the media. So instead of parties telling candidates what to say, media consultants report on findings of polls and focus groups, and then they tell the candidates what to say. So it's very likely, for example, that you will hear a politician say maybe not what's their thoughts, but of course by gauging public opinions and pollsters, and of course they would of course broadcast that to and through the media for you to consume. The White House can manipulate the media, of course, as the electronic throne quite successfully. And so too can other politicians through the following ways. As we alluded to before, photo opportunities, sound bites, spin control, where they can of course spin the news in their way upon which favors them, staged events like photo ops, trial balloons, where they try different types of things to of course assess popularity with policies and such, going public, which means when the president or a political person takes his case or her case directly to the people. And these are all things that of course can happen to the minds of many people when they consume the news. Now, I do believe this is the last part here of our presentation. Overall, there are some general trends about the media that we must establish to be fact and true, because studies show that over time, this is what we can observe about people's relationship with the media. The media covers the legislative branch or Congress the most negatively of all three branches. And I think that's because sometimes Congress is given the reputation of being a foil to the president in power. Doesn't matter if they're Democrat or Republican. Congress's main job, keep in mind, is to make the laws. So, of course, people in many ways have a love-hate relationship with them on that regard. There's also growing emphasis on sensationalism and scandal. Too much of this feeding frenzy can, of course, sway or alter the news. There's way far less coverage of the Supreme Court than of Congress and the presidency. In fact, most students may not even know who the Supreme Court justices are or some of the cases that are going up to the highest court in the land as we speak. But one thing must be understood, though. The media is most influential in the primary election seasons of our democracy. Rather than in general elections, the media focuses on primary elections because there's so many people and they're trying to predict who the next leader of the free world might be. Also, the media is rather influential on undecided voters. The media loves undecided voters. Most voters make up their minds, though, before the fall campaign, and many make up their minds even before the conventions. The media is also really active when it comes to increasing the importance of the internet and net roots, mostly because, of course, the media is always transforming, and so too is social media as well. Whether it's through fundraising for politicians and campaigns, communicating with the public through websites, YouTube, Facebook, Snapchat, or any other forms of medium, The media is in fact here to stay. The one question that remains is what role will you play in your relationship with the media and government? Thank you very much for tuning in, and good luck with completing the rest of the lesson.